All right. Hello and welcome to the second iteration of Lunchtime Looks for the 2025-2026 academic year. It is my pleasure to welcome you here and my pleasure to introduce Dr. Daniel Renfrew, who is a professor of anthropology and the chair of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, where he has a research focus on environment, toxic contamination, lots of things, urban critical medicinal and political anthropology, all of those words, but does really good and important work. And as many of you know, the Lunchtime Looks series is really about inviting members of our scholar community to view and talk about our exhibitions through their particular lens. So we emphasize to them that they need not, nor should they necessarily be artists or art historians, but that they will show us through their own research interests, and in this case, interaction with the artists, a unique perspective on the exhibitions that we have on display. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Renfrew.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Heather, and thanks, Virginia, for the invitations. Thank you to the WU Art Museum. I think this is a really cool initiative, and I'm definitely not an art historian, so you'll see that come out. But yeah, an anthropologist. I'm an Uruguayan by birth as well. I'm Uruguayan American, and you already said the words that I deal with in anthropology and cultural anthropology, environmental anthropology. And I did have the pleasure of meeting Gamaliel Rodriguez, the artist, here, and he gave me a tour and some explanations. It felt like an interview, which is one of the things that I do as an anthropologist. So I was really feel fortunate to do that. He's a remarkable person and a remarkable artist, and so it's just a pleasure to be here. So I'm really excited. I hope I say something that is interesting to someone. So I'm going to focus on this piece primarily, but I'm going to do a little sweep of the rest of the exhibit as well. So La Alegoría del San Ramón, or the Allegory of San Ramón, is the title of this piece. And I want to start with the idea or the question of what is an allegory. And I just looked through Merriam-Webster. It says allegory is the expression of truths or generalizations about human existence by means of symbolic fictional figures and their actions. Allegory is often expressed through art or through poetry. They reveal hidden meanings, sometimes multiple layers, often carry moral dimensions as well. And so they oftentimes have these surface meanings and these hidden meanings, or multiple layers of meanings and dimensions to what they're about. So on a first reading, we can look at this as a container ship that is blowing up, right? It's exploding. There's a violent fire that's ravaging the ship. It's about to sink, presumably. Gamaliel told me that it represented a container ship that was swallowed up by Hurricane Joaquin in 2015. I'm not sure if that's true, because I saw that, I was just looking up a little bit, and Hurricane Joaquin apparently hit more of the Bahamas and other parts of the Caribbean. It was 2015, but it did swallow 2 container ships, so this is part of the maybe artistic creative license, but it's an allegory, so it doesn't matter, really. But it was subject to this all-consuming fire. It's going to sink, and it's carrying precious cargo. Right? It's a container ship, so for an island nation like Puerto Rico, it's dependent on goods being brought in from the outside to make life happen, right? For people to live and to eat and to have goods and have things, right? So it's precious cargo in a way, but could be in part a morality tale for a cautionary tale for the dependency of Puerto Rico as an island nation in the world system. Then we have a second layer of meaning with the title. The name of the ship is the San Anton. And that name is taken, Gamaliel says, from a slave ship that sank in San Juan Harbor many years ago. That also could or could not be true exactly, apparently, but it doesn't matter, it's an allegory. So the ship sank and all the slaves perished. So on a first reading, we can look at the devastating loss of goods and economic well-being represented by the sinking of the cargo ship, the vulnerability of the island nation dependent on imports. A second reading is a much more direct and violent loss of the most precious of cargo, human souls who were forcibly imprisoned in torture and bondage, meeting a gruesome death. So the question is, why might Gamaliel Rodriguez have chosen to depict or conjure these 2 types of ships from very different historical periods and as a sort of layered palimpsest? How can they be read more broadly as an allegory of Puerto Rican history and culture, if that is indeed his intention? What lessons is he trying to convey? Well, I don't know the answers, but I'm going to take some guesses at some approaches to what I think we might find behind these, within this allegory. To do that, I want to detour again a little bit through Puerto Rican history so we understand where the island comes from and its people and what characterizes the place. So is Puerto Rico long settled by indigenous peoples going back maybe 4,000 years? At the time of Columbus, in 1493, when he landed on the island, discovered, encountered, later conquered the island, it was inhabited by the Taíno people who called the place Boriquen. And they were, for a time, enslaved through the colonial encomienda system, later decimated by violence and disease, as was the fate of indigenous peoples around the hemisphere. African slaves were first brought to the island in 1513, substituting for the dying and declining Taíno. And then following years of revolts and other pressures, slavery was abolished in 1873. Puerto Rico was part of the Spanish Empire for centuries, and is the crucible of great power imperial rivalries. So it was once allied with the Portuguese at the El Morro Fortress, which is a beautiful structure if anyone's been to San Juan. It was burned and sacked by the French. It was attacked by the British and the Dutch. And it was a Spanish colony until 1898, when it was taken over by the United States through the Spanish-American War. I think most of you are probably familiar with this history. Puerto Rico, among other places, were taken over by the United States. And then it was established in this Commonwealth status throughout the 20th century, which is this strange betwixt and between of coloniality and sovereignty. And so they're not a state, not an independent nation, but something in between and tied to the United States. So it was a country long dominated and ravaged by foreign powers, by disease, by natural disasters, including hurricanes and earthquakes. But from within, it developed a proud and unique raza, a people forged from the hybrid fusion of the European, the indigenous, and the African. In the 20th century, politically, has a rich history of social movements, nationalist movements. There's always a debate between independence movements, statehood, or maintaining the Commonwealth status, for instance. Economically, it began through the 20th century under Commonwealth status as an export nation, plantation economy of sugar, coffee, and tobacco. And then after World War II, this I want to focus on a little bit more, was Operation Bootstrap. And this was an initiative that the United States promoted to develop the island nation, develop Puerto Rico. It had a lot of, by macroeconomic indicators, a lot of success, a growth of the economy, of GDP, the influx of manufacturing plants everywhere. It became the largest hub of pharmaceutical companies, manufacturing plants in the world for a long time until tax exemptions were phased out in 2006. But also had serious debt crises, dependency on food imports, as we see reflected in this container ship. Big pharma brought the jobs, but also brought severe pollution, noxious air, and Superfund sites to the island. In places like Nocora was a place where the anthropologist Alexa Dietrich did a really wonderful ethnography on this area. The drug company next door was called. Puerto Rico's faced energy crises, recessions, crushing debt, and declared bankruptcy in 2014 that lasted until 2022. And so all these negatives are compounded by the natural disasters, the frequent earthquakes, the hurricanes. The most recent big ones are Irma and Maria in 2017. So a historical flash, just a quick historical flash of the history of the island nation. What I'm interested in as an anthropologist a little bit more is what critics and historians have examined in terms of Operation Bootstrap, for instance, in terms of its ideological dimensions. And so Operation Bootstrap was a modernization project. Modernization carries with it an assumed teleology, an assumed linear progression from something lesser to something greater, in this case, from tradition to modernity, to modernization. With that, it carries implicit and sometimes very explicit assumptions about what came before and the capacity or not of the people of a particular place, in this case Puerto Rico, to be like us in the West, to get here in a progression of time. These assumptions fall into the cultural realm and into debates about presumed notions of inherent ability and potential, implicit racialist tropes and discourses, some of these tied to ideas of, this is really interesting and disturbing, but really interesting idea of the degenerative tropics, right? Tropical areas as producing diminished faculties of the mind, diminished qualities, also compounded by racial miscegenation or the mixing of different races that scientific racist theories of the 19th and 20th centuries posited was a weakness, a weakening of the racial stock of a nation. The over-fecund tropics, the overabundant nature, something that would overcome attempts at civilization, right? Producing lazy people with limited work ethic and people mired in tradition that's holding them back. So the core message under this ideology, under this discourse is that for Puerto Rico to modernize, it must transcend its nature, both human and biophysical or ecological nature, and transcend its stubborn clinging to tradition. And that was really what was at the core of Operation Bootstrap. Now, on the other hand, we had Operation Serenity, which also emerged at the same time, 1950 into the 1970s. And this is a counterpoint to Operation Bootstrap, which I find really fascinating, is a cultural and artistic initiative promoted by the governor of the state of the Commonwealth at the time, Luis Muñoz, to promote local arts and culture and traditions, revitalize the traditional peasant Jíbaro, the indigenous Taíno, the Afro-Latin culture, and so forth, right, to embrace the traditions, embrace that. So I find these contrasting, contradictory projects of Operation Bootstrap and Operation Serenity layered upon the histories and legacies of European colonialism, indigenous genocide, and African slavery, a century-plus long liminal neocolonial status as a commonwealth of the United States, a massive transborder diaspora, so there's over 6 million people of Puerto Rican descent who live in the United States right now. There's over 3 million people on the island. A site of both industrial development and post-industrial abandonment, multinational corporate power, and the structural ferocity of its toxic fallout, all provide fertile ground to examine the character and challenges of contemporary Puerto Rican society. So in my view, Gamaliel Rodriguez's work reflects the tension between these processes and projects and their legacies. His art reflects, but also subverts, disrupts, and challenges these histories, probing what he and other Puerto Ricans think of themselves, their identity, on their own terms, but also through the mirror of the other's gaze. So taking these thoughts as a starting point and reflecting on the exhibit as a whole, I've been thinking in terms of the following cross-cutting themes, which I kind of titled my talk today by ruins, memory, and hope. And so I'm going to provide some brief reflection examples through the artwork, using the artwork exhibit. Okay. So ruins first. Walter Benjamin regarded ruins as petrified life, revelatory of traces from the past that, quote, mark the fragility of power and the force of destruction. Ruins can be material reflections of despair, but also the subject of nostalgia, aestheticized, romanticized, even commodified or gentrified. Ruins can provoke ambivalence, a proud past that once was, a signifier of what was lost, and also a failure of the present and a portend of an uncertain future. Gamaliel Rodriguez depicts scenes of ruination and ruins in multiple ways. The natural disasters are ever present, or rather the traces and aftermaths of natural disaster in a lot of his artwork. We have infrastructural ruination and abandonment, an air traffic control tower over there. An air traffic control tower overcome by nature, abandoned warehouses, refineries, and industrial facilities in several of these, a grounded fleet of aircraft. The San Ramon, the San Anton, is a scene of fire and destruction, reflections of a ruined ship and ruined lives. And all these themes are going to tie into each other. So that's the realm of ruins, but then we have the realm of and the theme of memory. And memory is both individual and collective. Memories reside first and foremost in our minds, but they're also found in echoes and traces in the material landscape. Because of this, they are rooted in place, with places thought of in an anthropological sense as meaningful and relational sites of belonging and identity. So through Gamaliel Rodriguez's work, again, we have really fascinating, the brain scans images. This is literal biological creators and repositories of memories, our brains, right? But these images for him, in producing them, provoke and evoke fear. They evoke the fear of losing one's mind, of being afflicted with a devastating condition, right? It's the kind of thing you see when there's a problem, right? Maybe a life-threatening problem. The fear of losing, as he told me, one's identity. He also has artwork depicting abandoned warehouses, as I said, refineries, pharmaceutical plants, airports. These are also sites of memory, and what I found really fascinating is that a lot of his work is drawn from personal memory of what he knew to be in the neighborhood around the corner. He never really saw it. He saw it from a certain angle, but never maybe just the entrance, never had a full view of it. So he's trying to paint from memory and from imagination as well. And that's where memory also touches on the collective. So memory is reflective of the importance of these sites for society as sources of jobs, as reference, again, of modernity. So in this case, memory work becomes a political project, right? I mean, remembering something that was lost, something that was once a source of pride, a source of wealth, a source of stability. This becomes political to remember collectively what has been abandoned, what has been left behind. One aspect of those images and those pieces I'm really interested in also is the perspective that he offers. So it's not from the child's view from the street level. These are flyby perspectives. They're from above. They're on the one hand like an omniscient memory, no one's memory in particular, or maybe everyone's memory, evoking sometimes maybe surveillance, like from a satellite, less a place, and more of an abstract space, right? There's no names, there's no signage, there's no distinguishing geographical features, there's no people, crucially. It's a post-social space, or as French anthropologist Marc Auger put it, a non-place, overtaken by nature. On the other hand, the view from afar also serves as a means of registering objectively what is below. It's a kind of bearing witness to the traces of what was once there and has since been lost or taken away. And then finally, in terms of memory, Gamaliel provides a couple pieces. There's one and the other one somewhere else, around the corner there, that are very personal. They're from his home. They're from his front yard. So Natural Power at My Front Yard and Forgotten Sentinel are the two works from his town. And these paintings, you see that they're different than the surveillance ones. They're different from the ones from above. They're full of, they're live and complex and bursting with color. So I see them as kind of loving postcards of home. And that brings me, that ties, so from ruins to memory, ties me to the final theme of hope. And I would say, hope is often born of rebellion. Hope can spring forth from the ruins. It's the rebirth of life following a forest fire. It's the matsutake mushrooms, rhizomatic, mycelium networks spreading and pushing through deindustrialized and degraded landscapes. It's Karl Marx's metaphor of the underground moles toiling in obscurity until provoking the revolutionary breaking point of the system. Memory fuels hope too. We remember collectively, we remember proudly who we were, who we could once again be. And then hope is also expressed through humor and irony, subverting the powerful and poking holes at their hubris. So in Gamaliel's work, I'm going to turn to the banana. So banana plants, Orinoco, Topocho, and Gestación, and Altered Musa, and Enchanted Premises, the banana plant prints. He plays ironically with the banana plant, or as he put it to me, the cliche of the banana. That exotic icon of tropicality, the pejorative emblem of the Central American and Caribbean Republic. But he recontextualizes, he sets up different compositions, different color palettes. He's reappropriating and resignifying the humble and beautiful banana, fusing primitivist, exoticized, and prehistoric tropes with futuristic imagery. He also told me, in passing of his life in relative poverty and obscurity as an aspiring artist earlier in his career, and we're talking about the difference between living poor in New York versus living poor in Puerto Rico, and I'm very much paraphrasing here. He said, I'd rather be poor on the island, at least it's beautiful, and I could go pick a banana or a mango when I'm hungry. And he also made reference to bananas, the food of the slaves, right? And so that's that's one. And then the palm trees, which I just love as well. The palm trees, we see it in this image, and we see it in the other image as well. The tropicalized notion of power in that piece. So it's meant as an ironic metaphor of power both electric and political. And it follows the widespread blackouts on the island and the collapse of the power grid that happened following the hurricanes and following the bankruptcy and following all the problems Puerto Rico has had in recent years. And he referred to it as a dark joke with a hint of irony. I think dark joke, hint of irony. I think he was, to get it? Yeah. And they're also found in his front yard, right? So the hybrid palm becomes a naturalized object of the landscape, a homegrown ingenuity, a part of Puerto Rico's new realities and new beginnings. So to bring this all together and back to La Alegoría del San Ramón, what is this an allegory of? What are some of its deeper moral, political, or even spiritual meanings? The container ship, as we've said, represents the contradictory promises and failures of Operation Bootstrap's modernization project, superimposed or resting on the ghosts of the slave ship, both a source of moral anguish and the building blocks, moral anguish for the slavery, but also building blocks of cultural traditions celebrated by Operation Serenity. We have ruination, ruins, disaster, rendered literally, symbolic, and viscerally here, the exploding ship, explosions and fires, encompassing the broader histories of disaster, both natural disaster and social disasters, and their legacies that are forged the island and its people. Memory. We have evoked memories of lives lost and ruined, of the palimpsest of superimposed peoples and histories, the vulnerabilities and dependencies of a semi-colonial condition, but also crucially of home. And then finally, hope through the subversive intervention of art itself, which is capable of telling a different, more sovereign story. The allegory, The Two Ships, in Gamaliel Rodriguez's broader work, becomes a morality tale, teaching us that despite the seemingly endless cycles of ruination and disaster, memories of beauty and solidarity remain. We will always have our beautiful bananas and our ingenious palm trees. The Boricua will continue to persevere, to remember together, and dream with each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Renfrew. And that was a beautiful example of this kind of interdisciplinary ethos of Lunchtime Looks and bringing this anthropological lens to look at this body of work. So we have some time for questions and answers. We are recording, so I will bring the microphone to you. Even if you're a person like me who projects well and is nice and loud, we ask that you speak into the microphone so that it is recorded for our YouTube archive. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Renfrew? All right, Professor Lupo.
Thank you for that. I was wondering, in your research outside of this, do paintings, contemporary paintings or historical paintings or just artwork in general, is that something that helps inform whatever it is at the time that you're looking into or researching?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I would say not most of the time, not directly, but as a cultural anthropologist doing ethnographic work, I'm interested in all of the multiple layers of cultural expression. And so if it's important to having a deeper understanding of a particular place and time, of a people in a particular place and time, of an issue, of a problem, then absolutely yes. And I'll give an example. My early work was on a lead poisoning epidemic in Uruguay, and I wrote a book on that. And there's a lot of art in that, art in the broader sense, not just paintings and plastic arts, but there's a whole chapter I have on murga, which is an expression of carnival, which it combines, it's like a satirical mode of singing and performance, stage performance. And I participated with a group that was rooted in this neighborhood that I did a lot of my work in, and lyrically they had some songs dedicated to the lead poisoning environmental justice issue, but also as an expression, kind of a cultural expression of place and identity and collective identity. I found it very fascinating as an inroad to a deeper understanding of that place in particular. but yeah, and then I draw from music a lot, but it could be if art forms, theater pieces too, right? Theater performances and plays. Yeah, it's something I think it's very important, but I'm open to it all the time. I don't force my way into it, but if it's relevant, absolutely, I love it. But I'm not an art critic. So.
I'd like to piggyback on that a little bit, because you kind of opened by saying, it's an allegory, so it's okay if we don't know. Virginia and I have banged our heads against proverbial walls trying to figure out about if there is an actual history of the San Antone or what those stories are. So how do you kind of grapple with ideas of kind of memory and subjectivity? And I think art's goal is not always, objectivity and capital T truth. I don't know if anthropology is either, but how do you deal with that in ethnographic study?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a really central question too. We do grapple with it. I think cultural anthropology and ethnography is more open to the kinds of, giving more license to capital T truth, right? Because if it's important, it really doesn't matter if it actually happened. What matters is that people think it happened, and people shape understandings and meanings surrounding this series of events that resonate with their lived experiences and their histories. And so it can be a tale, it can be a morality tale, it can be something that didn't happen quite in the way that it's told, but it's still revealing and important in that sense. And so my goal as an anthropologist is not to parse out what's true and what's not true necessarily. It can be sometimes as well. But oftentimes, if it's just indicative of a people's understandings of themselves and their place in the world, then you have to take it seriously. I feel an obligation to take it seriously, right?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
It was kind of striking because it was the first time I realized when you said there's no people in them. And like Heather and I have been writing tour plans about these works, and I just never considered it. I think because they're so emotional to me, like there's clearly, I know they're very human. But I guess, what do you think the significance of that, like, lack of humanity in them? What is it? Was it just, an artistic choice, do you think? Or do you think it's deeper and more symbolic than that?
Yeah, let's ask him. No, I think it's interesting. It's fascinating. So there's definitely the traces of people, right? Traces of people's activities are everywhere. Yeah. But he does, it seemed to emphasize those ideas of abandonment of what was there before, the kind of a post-social landscape, even in his images of home, right? And that is fascinating. I'm not sure why. The only people that appear are through their brains, right? Yeah, but they're not. They're exactly dehumanized, in a lot of ways, even though it's the most intimate of the human, part of the human. Yeah, I don't have a better answer. I think that's a great, yeah. But I did find it fascinating, and I didn't necessarily pick up on that right away either. Yeah. Or I would have asked him.
Yeah, again, because
I didn't. Yeah.
You can see there were people there.
Yeah.
So
Any other questions? Okay, so, well, I want to thank you all for being here and for this exploration. And like I said, I think that this is really the nature and the spirit of this lecture series. So thank you very much. And I'm sorry I flubbed your intro, because all those words that you study are very important. I was running from a tour with a bunch of high schoolers. But we'd like to welcome you all back on November 7th. Dr. Maria Perez from the Department of Geography is going to provide yet another lens on this space. She is from Puerto Rico, so we'll have yet another perspective on the meanings behind these pieces. So we would love to see you on November 7th at 12:30. We also are having a Halloween mystery event, particularly targeted towards students, but all adults are welcome, on Friday, October 24th at 5 p.m. So if anyone wants to come find out who stole a work of art from the galleries, not for real, Karen. Please join us for that, and follow us on our social media for further updates about programs. And thank you once again to Dr. Renfrew.
Yeah, thank you.